सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Do you still read the newspapers regularly every morning? Do you read more than one? I'll give you my own example. I read a lot. At least I get a lot at home because I'm in the news business. But I find increasingly, I look at them. Sometimes I don't look at them too carefully. I skim read them. I certainly don't have the interest in them. I don't peruse them with the passion that I used to demonstrate, say, 10 years ago. And what about television? There was a time when I would come home in the evenings and I'd put on the news channels and I'd try and figure out what was happening. I thought they were really important as indicators of what people regarded as news. When I was editor of the Hindustan Times, we had a guy whose job was just to monitor news channels and tell us at the evening meeting when we were deciding what was going into the newspaper, how the news channels were looking at the world. Now I find I'll go to Netflix, I'll go to Amazon, I won't go to news TV. I'll hardly ever watch news channels. I may sort of skim them, I may surf through them. Rarely, but I might do that. My guess is that most people I know feel the same way. And why do we do it? Well, because I think when it comes to news channels, the answer is pretty clear. They are news channels only in the name. There isn't much news in them. Whenever there is news, the news is presented with so much bias that you don't really believe it. And most of the time goes in these so-called debates in which useless non-entities shout at each other, while anchors, who are pretty useless themselves, don't even intervene to restore order to the debate. And if they do intervene, it's nearly always by taking sides or behaving or acting as though they're on the side of the establishment. When it comes to newspapers, I have to say, there isn't that level of bias or that level of nonsense. Most newspapers, and I mean English newspapers, the language press is more uneven, are more responsible than television channels. If you read a newspaper, you do get a sense of what's happening in the country. So here, my problem is different. It's not that I object to the medium. I object to the fact that the news is just so depressing. I was looking at the papers 2 days ago before I put them away, and look at the headlines. Constable runs wild in train, murders 4 people, 3 of them random Muslims. Yogi Adityanath says Muslims should make peace. They shouldn't demand mosques. He says this even though there's like a big dispute going on in the courts. Riots in Gurugram. Monu Manesar may be involved. It just goes on and on like this. And nearly always, well, most of the time anyway, there's a single agenda. It's Hindu-Muslim. So you look at it, and it's not a reflection of the papers alone, it's a reflection of the world we live in. You say, this is what India has come to? After so many years of independence, when we seem to be on the verge of becoming a global superpower, inside India, we are losing ourselves in sectarian conflicts that date back to the medieval times. Now, I am not saying, many people say this and then jump to the next thing and start blaming the central government. I am not blaming any one person. India has always had a history of conflict. India has always had a history of communal tensions. This country was born bloodshed in 1947. But the intention of nearly every government that's taken over since 1947 has been to heal the wounds. Even the BJP and the Shiv Sena used to once say, elect us because when we're in office, there are fewer communal riots, there's much more communal harmony. And people used to get annoyed when they said that, but it wasn't untrue. Nobody says that any longer. When is the last time you heard the BJP say something like that? You get the sense that no political party cares now about dousing communal fires. No political party cares about giving us a stable India where we can go about our lives without worrying about riots, where minorities and the majority can go out secure in the knowledge that they will not be targeted only because of their religion. As I said at the beginning, I don't want to blame any one person because India is too vast and too complex for all of this to be centrally directed. My sense now is that the genie is out of the bottle. There is just so much hatred all around that nobody can control it. I don't even think the BJP at the center is necessarily happy with what its fringe organizations get up to. The BJP at the center wants to say we're for a stable India, but what can it do about its fringe organizations? The poison has now gone too deep. So what unites all of this is not necessarily party persuasion. It's hatred and poison. It's just hatred that dominates everything that happens in India. And all of us worry and wonder, when is this hatred going to get us next? People say to me when they read about the constable on the train, what must it feel to be a Muslim in India? And yes, it must be pretty frightening. You have a uniformed officer who takes out a service gun and he shoots his superior first, who's a Hindu, but then goes on to walk through the bogies and select 3 men he did not know, who had nothing in common, except that they had beards and that they were Muslims. After that, he goes on a rant and he makes the usual nasty links between Muslims and Pakistan, attacks the media, and tells us that we have to live in the India of Modi and Yogi. Now the government is saying that how do we know he actually said that? Maybe the audio was morphed, etc. So I think it's unlikely, but I'm prepared to say it's not impossible. Maybe the audio was morphed. But can you explain why he selected these 3 random people? The only thing they had in common was they were Muslims. It's being said that you can't pay any attention to him because he was mentally disturbed, which leads you to its own problems. If he was a psycho, as they're now pretending or claiming he was, why was he given a gun? Why was he allowed to go around in uniform and in a position to murder people, including his own superior officer? What does it say about law and order in this country? And even assuming that they're right and he was a psycho and they made a mistake giving him a gun, he was a pretty selective psycho, no? He went and only found Muslims to kill. It's odd, don't you think? I could go on. There are many, many instances. I don't talk about the Imam who was shot dead in his own mosque in Gurugram. I don't talk about individual incidents much more than I have already. But yes, if you're a Muslim in this country, you do feel targeted. There's no getting around that, and we should accept it. But I have other questions. How does it feel to be a Hindu in this India? Do you really, as a Hindu, identify with these guys? Do you identify the murderers, the mosque burners, the people who go berserk, the people who kill Muslims on the grounds that they've eaten beef? Is this what Hinduism is about? For years and years, in fact, since India was made independent, the claim made proudly by Hindus has been that most of the third world has dictatorships. Look at Pakistan. It has lurched from military rule to dictatorship to coup to whatever. Look at India. We're so stable. And then, with a little note of Hindu self-pride, we say, the reason we are so stable is because Hindus are secular by nature, because Hinduism is a tolerant religion, because we appreciate diversity. I used to believe that. Is that still true? Do we as Hindus still say that about India? Is that a true reflection of today's India? And finally, what does it mean to be an Indian in today's India? Of course, there are the external manifestations of the rate of growth. There's the fact that the world looks at us as a bulwark against China, the fact that we are a great market. But aren't we sort of tearing ourselves in from within? Aren't we creating a society that is not diverse, not pluralistic, and unequal? You can say it doesn't matter as long as Hindus are on top, we're fine. No, you're not. Hindus are not on top forever. If you have 15% of the population alienated, if you let them feel that they have no stake in this country, you think they're just going to keep turning the other cheek? You think they're going to keep cooperating with this great Hindu Rashtra where they're second-class citizens? And when the alienation takes on a more violent or a nastier form, when there's a reply to the Hindu communal violence from the other side, what happens to India? What happens to our stability? I'll take you back to the 1980s. Sikhs were 2% of our population. When a certain minority within Sikhs, not even the majority, felt alienated, what happened to India? What happened to stability? Do you really think it will work if 15% of India is alienated? Can any country hold together? So forget for a moment about Hindu superiority and forget about the fact that you don't want to be nice to Muslims if you don't. Think of yourselves. Think of your own self-interest. I don't dispute that Hinduism has had a large part to play in creating India's pluralistic and secular ethos. But if you destroy that ethos, if you turn Hinduism into a Talibanized mirror of radical Islam, you end up the way countries that are in the grips of radical Islam have to come to. You end up as a fractured nation, as a nation that simply cannot go ahead in the world because it's too busy just trying to stay together. Is that what you want? That, unfortunately, is how I feel when I read the newspapers. Forget about television, I mean, there's garbage mostly. But when you read the newspapers, when you see what's happening, don't you worry? Don't you think this is not the India I wanted? An India where minorities were targeted, an India where riots could break out anytime and you were unsafe, an India where television channels, instead of telling you what was happening in the world, actually spread hatred. That, unfortunately, is the road we're going down. And I can say nothing to reassure you and tell you that don't worry, the road takes a fork and we'll be okay. If this goes on, no, we're not okay.